Theistic evolution is the concept of believing that instead of God using a different method of creation, he has used evolution as a process to create life. And it makes sense in a lot of theories because evolution only provides the base for a process when creation is just said to be done by God. This concept is actually really interesting because to think about it, if we say God created everything, it means that there are methods in which he had to use, per se, because as we've learned, energy cannot be created or destroyed. So, which means God might be able or has been able to transfer energy from objects. And remember, since he's an uncaused caused being, we are caused beings. Basically, what uncaused caused beings are, they are things, objects, or beings that have no beginning and no end. If God's an uncaused caused being, God has always been God and will never not be God and will always exist and will never not exist. Unlike humans, where we have not existed and will not exist in the future as we die. But to say that God used evolution to create humans would also mean that he might have written most of the universe's internal logic or mathematics or physics. That's why some rules in the universe don't disprove God, they actually just show a process. Technically, what I'm saying is, if a being is all powerful, it is possible that instead of making nothing out of nothing, they took energy and converted it into a certain object or piece, as in turning energy into stars, humans, plants, objects, microorganisms, anything that exists right now has energy. No matter how low or how high, it still has energy. Even speed has energy. Speed is just energy in the form of velocity. So, if we say that God used evolution as a process, we can also say that all mathematical and physical constants that construct the universe can be also attributed to God. But this doesn't make sense because it kind of sounds like I'm diverting from the point I was stating. Is religion cope? So, let's start here. If religion is cope and the definition of cope is, you can tell I've done very little research for this video because I'm just searching up cope, but cope is a manner of which you adjust to a situation. So, are we just adjusting to the situation of our existence by trying to have a creator so we can make sense of our existence and trying to give it a meaning or a sense of fulfillment, since creation can actually be made sense of? And it gives meaning to some people's lives, which leads them to worshipping something that most of the time they have no physical evidence for. But as I'm all saying this, I do not believe in God. I believe in God. I am a Christian, but I prefer the standpoint of theistic creationism, where you believe God and you believe that God used evolution as a process to create humans and all other physics as rules or boundaries for the universe. That is why some things just don't physically make sense, because there is a person or being that just does not want us to cross that specific boundary. Like how we live in the third dimension, and we can't really go through time because time much less of a dimension, because as Danny Mullen has presented the theory, yeah, he's the one who's actually inspired this YouTube video. He stated that if time is a dimension, we should be able to move through it the same way going from 2D to 3D would allow you to move through depth. I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say. If a 3D object has space in between, we can move through that space, unlike a 2D object where you can't move through space. It's more or less of up and down. But 3D space, it's up and down, left and right, and the center space in between, and all directions all in between that. But if we were to introduce a fourth dimension, it wouldn't make much sense, because the fourth dimension is not something your brain can perceive. It's like when you try to understand a number, but your brain cannot physically understand what the depth of the number is. It knows what the number is, but what the depth of the number is a completely different something. When something is impossible to understand, your brain will try to, but not understand it. It's how we make the comparison from a million to a billion seem much less simple, but it's not. And a lot of correction is necessary, since you can't perceive something that you haven't seen or understand or felt. You can't understand the fourth dimension because you've never been in the fourth dimension. We try to imagine the fourth dimension as time, but if dimensions are spatial, how is time the fourth dimension? Since if a spatial dimension is something you can move through, time is not something you can move through the same way you can move through space. So trying to say that time is a spatial dimension while space and time are two different things doesn't actually physically make sense. So moving through space is possible to understand in the fourth dimension, but it wouldn't make sense. It's like the perception of how objects are, how we see something in the second dimension as completely flat. That's the same perception you would have if you were in the fourth dimension. Walls don't seem like walls. You can see through them, you can see past them, you can see through humans, you can see through past anything. If we try to imagine it as a drawing, we tend to imagine stick figures. Stick figures don't really have a lot of internal organisms and whatnot, but technically the depth of the drawing would be more of you seeing the internal of the stick figure, since you can see through the second dimension, and that would be the same for a fourth dimensional being. They'd be able to see your organs, your brain, everything in between you, every single neuron, every motion that happens in your body, he can see it with your bones and what's through your bones and even your arteries. And that would mean that he can freely move through our dimension in ways that we cannot comprehend. And to say that it is impossible wouldn't make sense, because it's not impossible. It's impossible to perceive when you're in the specific point in time. Yes, it's impossible to perceive, but not impossible to happen. There's a difference. Just because you can't understand something doesn't mean that something cannot exist. The absence of understanding isn't the absence of existence. I think I'm paraphrasing a different term, but I can't quite remember it. The absence of understanding isn't the absence of existence. It's just the absence of understanding. You can't understand something, which means that does not mean it doesn't exist. The same way you cannot understand religion and think God doesn't exist. No, your non-understanding does not mean that existence is impossible. It just means that existence is unperceivable. You cannot understand the depth of clarity and the depth of understanding and the depth of purpose of something that is omnipotent and not in a dimension or understanding or point of existence where we cannot reach with the same understanding we use to understand our own existence. You go through everyday life and you think an omnipotent presence, a being that has always existed and will ever exist, would understand your struggles. That doesn't make sense. That's why some people tend to say that the existence of God is impossible, because how can something always exist and not exist? Again, as I've said about the fourth dimension, you cannot perceive it, therefore you don't understand it. Just because you don't understand it does not mean it does not exist. The absence of understanding is not the absence of existence. You see, the same thing over and over. So, your understanding is not fundamentally tied to the existence of anything. It's just fundamentally tied to a perception of something. So, we can prove some things exist and some rules are true. Like if you drop an object, it's gonna fall because of gravity. But you can't prove the existence of something you cannot understand. You can't prove that the multiverse exists, and you can't prove that it doesn't exist. You can't prove that the universe is infinite, and you can't prove that it's not infinite. You can't prove that there's not an infinite number of infinite universes. I don't know if that's a theory, but I've actually thought about it myself. If infinite space is infinite, can an infinite amount of infinite space exist in infinite space? Because you can't fill infinity, as well as something being infinite inside something else that's infinite cannot exist. But maybe that's a misconception of infinity as well. But me trying to say religion is cope is not the factor of which this video is about, actually. But there are some misconceptions. If we try to say that God exists and he created heaven and earth and hell, what we're saying is God has always existed and will ever exist, and he decided to create one advanced enough civilization that they can form coherent thoughts and bring about his knowledge and create theories and ideas. So So what I'm trying to say that it might be a bit pretentious to assume that one society out of trillions of trillions of possibilities exists. It is just that if something is out of the depth of sight, it is also impossible to perceive. If you cannot see something because it is too far away, it's also possible that that thing is not there. Or it's possible that it's there, but you just cannot see it. So, in the same understanding, we could have said that God created heaven and earth. And that's not really the case. He might have created multiple civilizations with coherent enough thought and processing and consciousness to perceive the possibility of higher existence. But he left them without perception of another society. And he gave us consciousness. And he also gave them consciousness. And with consciousness comes ideas. And comes self-awareness. To a degree, everybody's self-aware. If you know you exist and you understand that you exist, you are self-aware. Self-aware doesn't mean that you know how your brain works, you think about your surroundings. It means that you understand that you exist. Even though you don't understand why you exist, you understand that you exist, not why you exist. There's a there and there's a there. So, you understand you exist, but you don't understand why you exist. That's being self-aware. Which also means that the possibility of other life is probable, but isn't seen as possible to other people. And our perception of aliens could be completely wrong, because the idea of aliens is defined as something that come from another planet. And something coming from another planet cannot always be organisms that are complex enough to form thoughts. They could be animals, like animals in perception. They have the same level of self-awareness as an animal. They understand that they exist, but they have no depth of clarity and no thoughts that go past a certain level. So, like animals, they cannot understand how to build rockets, cannot understand that other civilizations exist, they cannot understand that there's perception of tomorrow, there's a perception of trust, there's a perception of love, there's a perception of existence. They understand that they exist, not why. They know they exist. They can't prove their existence truly to a certain degree, but they know that they're alive. And assuming that all alien civilization is sentient and self-aware and conscious would be basically saying that trillions of possibilities had to happen for that to happen. And once you think about it, we're all just much of coincidence if God does not exist. What I'm trying to say is our existence is completely a coincidence if a creator does not exist, because that would make more sense for other life not existing if a creator exists. But we don't have enough depth to understand why a creator would only create one civilization or hide them from each other. Or there's evolutionary barrier. I keep forgetting all these theories that I'm stating, but if I can, I'll try to edit them through. But there's an evolutionary barrier where there's a point in time where we are going to get intelligent enough to perceive other life or intelligent enough to destroy ourselves. And that barrier could be the reason why life never survives long enough to see each other. But through religion, we try to explain why, as a pretentious thought, we are the only existing creatures. And that's very pretentious in my opinion. But it's understandable. Through many years of research, we have not found any other creatures. It's a possibility, but it's a very pretentious thought. And it could be very, very egotistical to a being. It could sound very egotistical to a being who has created many civilizations, but has only shown his existence and his only existence to those beings, but they have not understood the depth at which the being thinks on. The depth of thought is impossible to understand because a being above us, like I've said, would be in the fourth or 70th thousand trillionth of dimensions above us, and we cannot understand the thought process. It's like how you draw something on a page, but imagine that something can actually move around on the page. They're only bound by the page. They can only exist on the page. Imagine our universe is just a very, 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 very large page that you draw something on, and everything that you draw becomes alive. And to that being, the being is just writing a story. And we could be the most insignificant of creatures in that story. But our pretentious nature makes us believe that we are the only existence on the page. We cannot be the first. We could be the first, or we could be the last existence on the page. The universe has existed for 13 billion years, which means that in that 13 billion years, there could have been possible life in so many places. That's if the universe is finite. If something is finite, it means that it ends. And if the universe is infinite, it doesn't end. And the concept of the universe being infinite would also introduce the possibility that God doesn't exist, because an infinite universe has never started and will never end. This one is a quite confusing one, but the same way that God is uncaused, the universe would be uncaused if it was infinite, because infinite cannot just appear. It has to have always existed, and that would contradict the existence of God, because if something has always existed, it means that it has always been around, and which means there is no need for it to be created. So the theory of a creator would not make sense. But if the universe was created, that increases the necessity of a creator. I don't know if this video made any sense to you guys, but Danny Mullen, I don't know if it's Danny or... I just started recording this video immediately after I watched this series on the perception of dimensions, but it's a very interesting critique I have on existence, and I don't know, the thumbnail or the title might be clickbaity, but views, I guess. But if you understand all the points in this video and you did enjoy listening to me ramble on. I don't think I'll be editing any parts of this video because I truly want to keep the depth of clarity and the freshness of my thoughts in the video. If you understand what I'm trying to say, the consistency of my voice and the consistency of my thoughts will make more sense as you're watching the video and will make it feel as if the thoughts are all coherent. So if you did enjoy this video, please subscribe, and this is my first time doing this, so peace, stay fluffy.